So how do you pick a new CPU?
Hi guys, I'm Paul, this is Diane, and we are the PC Zombies, and today we're going to talk about how to pick a CPU for your new PC build. It's the most important decision you can make, and it also is the first decision you have to make. Once you pick the CPU, then you can select the motherboard you want to buy. The motherboard must be compatible with the CPU. It must match the same socket that the CPU has. And then once you pick the motherboard, you can pick the memory, the SSD drives. And the CPU also determines what kind of cooling system you're going to use. If you get a low-end CPU for just office work, you might just use air cooling. But if you want it super quiet and you're going to also need more performance out of it, you may get all-in-one cooler. And finally, the CPU may also help you decide what kind of power supply you're going to buy. The CPU is the second biggest draw on power in your computer next to the graphics card.
So you still haven't told me how you pick a CPU.
Okay, all right. So here, the first decision you need to make is, do you need more speed or more cores? And to make that decision, you need to watch our previous video on what's slowing down my PC. It will tell you how to use the task manager, and you can see, am I having a problem with my CPU? And if so, what is the problem? Do I need more cores or do I need more speed? This really changes how you select a CPU, because if you need more speed, you might need to overclock your PC to get that speed. The easiest thing to do to get speed is to add more cores, but if your problem on your computer doesn't use those cores, that's not going to make it any faster. In fact, that might make it slower, because the more cores you have, the hotter your PC runs, and the hotter your PC runs, the more likely it's going to thermal throttle down and run slower to keep the CPU from burning out. And if you could turn off those cores, either by custom building your PC or by buying a CPU with fewer cores to begin with, then your temperature of your CPU will be lower, and you can then run the CPU faster. You may even want to overclock your PC to make it go faster. If you're that ambitious and you're going to do that, keep watching our videos, we'll cover that as well. But your cooling solution may become a required water solution if you really want to get the most out of your CPU. So next you need to decide the brand of CPU you want to use. Either Intel or AMD, those are the big popular ones, and typically I like Intel, and I'm going to only cover Intel in this video. Once you know what your brand is, you can go through all the same steps, even if it's AMD.
So you still haven't answered my question. How do you pick a CPU?
All right, we're getting there. The next thing I always do when I pick a CPU is I document what my current CPU is doing, so I know that when I buy a new CPU, I'm actually meeting or surpassing the problem areas of the old CPU. And that way I can maybe find a cheaper CPU that gives me enough jump in power to make things work. And it also helps me to keep from forgetting something that's real important to me when I'm buying a new CPU. Next thing you do is you bring up the task manager. The video we just did on what's slowing down my PC shows you how to use the task manager. Once you bring it up on the task manager, it'll tell you what your CPU is. Now what you want to do is go to the Intel website and type in the search box that CPU name and the word quick reference. So like in this example, it says the CPU is an i9-9900K. So I'll type that into the search box followed by the words quick reference. And that'll bring up the quick reference sheet on that CPU. Then what I do is I like to document the key items on this specification sheet so I can tell that I'm really getting what I want. And I can also use this to help me make decisions later without having to go back and forth a lot. So in my case, what I document first of all is how many performance cores, those are the ones that do all the heavy lifting. How many efficiency cores, these are run at about half the speed of the performance cores in general, and they also run at a lot less power, but you often have more of these. How many threads does the CPU have? And what is the turbo speed of the performance cores? That's interesting to me, because if I'm looking for a faster CPU, I now know what the speed of my old CPU is and how many cores I had. Next, I write down how much power did it take, what socket was it, and what are the PCIe configurations? Like what configurations for PCIe, what are the revisions, and how many lanes? And finally, I also want to know what kind of graphics capability it has. With that written down, now I can shop for a new CPU, and everything should be real easy to compare without having to go back to this page over and over again and find that one item.
That's great information. So have you picked your CPU yet?
No, so the next step in picking the CPU is, we're talking Intel, is you want to pick your performance tier. There are 4 performance tiers, i3, i5, i7, and i9. The i3s are for like work computers at an office, things where you're just doing spreadsheets, maybe nothing complicated, word processing, things like that. An i5 may be a good gaming CPU if you're trying to buy a gaming PC on a budget. i7 is probably a better gaming CPU because you can get a little bit more out of it. But in general, most games don't require a lot of cores. If you're really doing something real demanding, like video editing for my case, and you know it's going to use all the cores and all the CPUs, you might want to step up to an i9. Once you pick your performance tier, the next thing to pick is your generation. Intel and AMD, for that matter, have different generation chips, and that means they got a new CPU with a completely different architecture than the last generation. And usually the architecture puts more stuff on it, like more cores, more transistors, more memory, more cache. For example, in the CPU we were just looking at, the i9900K, that's a 9th generation because the first number is a 9. So it's not the 99th generation.
Okay.
But after that, now that we're in the teens, the 10th generation starts with 10, and the current CPU generation now for Intel is 14. But you could buy maybe a 12th generation or 11th generation, or maybe you buy a 11th generation i7 for the price of a 13th generation i5. And the way you do that, I find that's easiest, is you go to Amazon, you type in i5 CPU, hit enter, and it will give you a list of those, and you can look at the prices, and you can tell the generation because that's the first 2 numbers in the CPU name. So you could save your budget as well as getting much more power.
Does the generation affect the compatibility with other parts?
That's a good question. I mean, yeah, it does. Each new generation usually has a different socket, so it won't fit on other motherboards. But the real key, if you're building your own PC, is to pick the CPU you want and then go buy the motherboard that works with it and the memory that works with it. The last letter in your CPU name is oftentimes a suffix that tells you more about that particular CPU. For example, the one that we were just talking about, 9900K, K means that CPU is unlocked and can be overclocked. That's really important if you want to overclock. If you don't have a K, you can't overclock it. Another suffix that's real common and worth knowing about is the F suffix. The F suffix says there is no graphics GPU in the CPU. A lot of CPUs nowadays have graphics built in. Like if you bought a laptop, you wouldn't have a graphics card. You would just have built-in graphics capability in the CPU. So you might say, okay, I'm a gamer. I'm going to use a graphics card, so I don't need the GPU inside the CPU. I recommend you always get it. If you're going to build your own PC, you will want your own GPU on the CPU for, first of all, building the hello world, and as well, any kind of problems you have during the build, it's nice to have, and it usually only costs an extra $10 or $20.
Oh, that's it.
So Di,
Yeah?
now I've picked my CPU. We've answered all those questions, but you don't go buy it right away, okay?
Okay.
Because our last video, how to buy parts for your new PC, will tell you why you shouldn't just go buy the CPU, but there's another reason too. You want to compare it against the problems you're trying to solve with your current PC, and you also want to compare it against the other things that you need in general that may not be found in a performance test. Remember that list we made up of our old CPU? Let's put a new column next to it, and let's write down the answers for the new CPU. So do the same thing, go to Intel, look it up, find the quick reference, and fill in the gaps for what each of those items are. Now let's talk about those items, and I'll explain how you can compare it to what you want in your new PC. So the first item is, remember how we wrote down how many performance cores, efficiency cores, and the turbo speed? Look at that, look at your old PC, and see if you're getting the kind of boost that you really hope to be getting. If not, then you might have picked a CPU that's too slow for your needs or doesn't have enough cores to solve the problems you've already diagnosed. Next, let's look at the power. How much power is that new CPU going to use? If it's using an awful lot of power, like over 100 watts, you'll probably pick a real high-end CPU. And if you did that, that means you're going to need a high-end power supply. That's going to change your budget. And if it's not a lot of power, maybe you can use your old power supply when you build your Hello World PC. Next is a socket. If you happen to pick a socket that's compatible with your old motherboard, maybe you could test the new CPU on your existing PC. I have a problem with, I need a lot of SSD space. I mean, I want as much as I can get. I'll buy four terabyte SSD cards if I could put them on my motherboard. So at least make sure that your CPU has enough fast PCIe lanes to handle more SSDs. If you're going to use a graphics card, you want to look at the PCIe configuration and make sure you can put your graphics card and use all the proper slots on that CPU to get the maximum performance. When we were talking in the video on what's slowing down my PC, we also talked that memory might be what's slowing you down. If memory was your issue, make sure that the new CPU can handle the memory footprint you're going to need. It won't tell you how much the memory costs or anything, but at least it'll tell you if it's capable of handling more memory. Look at the graphics needs as well. If you're going to run only on the GPU and you're not going to get your own graphics card, then you really want to make sure those specs will work for you. Does it support HDMI? Does it support DisplayPort? And will it support the screen that you're going to use?
Is that it?
That's it, Di. What do you think?
Well, you taught me a lot, and I think I could do it myself.
Really?
Yes, I think I can.
That's awesome. Okay, guys, subscribe if you want to see our next video, which is how to pick a motherboard. This is where we start getting into the compatibility issues. And thanks for watching.
Please give us a thumbs up if you liked the video.
Bye, guys.
Bye.